Happy New Year! Welcome to the Temporal and Interspatial Misplacement Engine Machine, also known as Time Machine. And yes, that is a Godzilla poster that's mostly framed out. I decorated this before the time travel soon. I'm gonna talk to you more, but, over there. Well, we've started our incredible journey to read every single comic book available on the Marvel Unlimited app. Of course, now that I have time traveled back in time to 1939, the app's not going to help things out much. So I'm going to have to actually go purchase these comics myself. Since the art form is still in its infancy, these things aren't exactly the most accessible things in this time period. However, if my research is correct, there should be a small town nearby with a little newsstand where I am certain to find exactly the book I'm looking for. Well, alright, let's stop putting this off. I'm going to go pick up some comic books. That's weird. Okay, I guess I'm not going to a newsstand.
Someone left all of the comics that I was going to read in today's video on my doorstep.
That's really weird. I don't know where this came from, but, you know, maybe we don't need to worry about it. First, we have Marvel Comics #1, which released in August 1939, at least according to my spreadsheet, the information on which I got from the Marvel Unlimited app. Now, unlike the comic books that we're used to today, Marvel Comics #1 actually contains 6 different storylines, and that's going to be a pattern that holds true for every single issue we read in today's video. Here we have the Human Torch, written by Carl Burgos, and the first ever Marvel comic book storyline.
The story starts with Professor Horton, an incredible inventor who managed to create an exact replica of a human man. The only problem? He bursts into flames when he touches oxygen. The press immediately demands he destroy his horrible creation, but they settle on the reasonable compromise of encasing him in concrete and burying him in Horton's backyard. There are no holes in this plan. Unfortunately, there was a hole in the Torch's gold cylindrical coffin, and also a hole in the concrete block. Also, did they bury him above ground? Is that concrete block just sitting in Horton's backyard? What were they planning to do with that? Anyway, a little bit of air leaks in and the Human Torch explodes. He escapes, sets the city ablaze, and has a brief existential crisis before the firefighters try and hose him down. And a quick fun canon fact, a concentrated blast of water tickles the robot man made out of fire. Torch jumps in some random pool and we meet the first ever Marvel villain.
Sardo! You know, Sardo, come on. He's like this mobster who wears a yellow suit, wants to use the Human Torch to commit insurance fraud. Come on, he's iconic. He's the first ever Marvel villain. He's probably gonna be in Secret Wars, guys.
He takes the Human Torch to the warehouse of Ackman Warehouses, Inc. Human Torch burns the place to the ground and flies away using his blue and red flames that combined make him lighter than air?
Google doesn't exist in 1939, so I can't prove this, but I'm pretty sure that's not how science works.
In any case, he easily burns down Sardo's house and kills his henchman by crushing him underneath a superheated car. He then learns that pure nitrogen can turn his flame off before Sardo throws a tank of sulfuric acid at the Human Torch. Sardo dies in the resulting explosion.
I'm realizing now why you maybe hadn't heard of him.
Human Torch somehow uses a tank of nitro to make his flame powers work on command. Don't ask me how. I've given it a lot of thought, and the only thing I can think of is that he put the nitro directly into his mouth, and since he is a robot and has no lungs, the nitro just stayed inside of him somehow? I don't know, it's all I got. The cops say he doesn't have to enter police custody as long as Horton keeps his eye on him. The Human Torch proceeds to leave Horton at his earliest convenience, and the story ends with the promise of more exciting adventures next month.
There are still 5 stories left in this issue, so we're gonna have to get things going a little faster if we want to get through all this today. Next, we've got The Angel by Paul Gustafson, and don't be alarmed, it's not a religious text. I think.
Don't look now, but the 6 big men have taken over an entire city. This sounds pretty serious. They terrorized a restaurant, a city official's home, a subway station, a nightclub, a gambling house, and a delivery syndicate.
Those monsters!
3 of the victims of the 6 big men take matters to the police and then peer pressure a judge into letting them practice legal vigilantism. But then this guy suggests a mysterious crime fighter named the Angel. The policeman protests, saying that's too far. The Angel will stop at nothing. But just then, a note crashes through the precinct window. The Angel is already on the case. And what's more, he's figured out the existence of a seventh, even badder, big man. The angel makes his dramatic appearance before hiding in the backseat of the first big man's car. He strangles the guy to death while he's driving and leaves behind some nice poetry for the investigators. Next is the second big man, who the angel literally mashes into a pulp.
Just in case you think I'm being a little dramatic here, I'm going to actually look at my script and read word for word the passage where the angel kills the second big man. After literally mashing him into a pulp, Mike Malone crumbles into a heap.
At the sight of this, the third big man jumps out of a window.
The angel's powers aren't as clear-cut as you would think they are. I'm personally not sure if lightning speed and fury of a charging lion are actual superpowers or just kind of descriptors of how mighty he is. Either way, a handful of gunmen using non-lethal force proves too much for the poor hero, as he's tied up and hand-delivered to the fourth big man, Trigger Bolo.
A mysterious woman intervenes in the shooting range execution of the angel, insisting that they take it outside. More specifically, to the woods outside the city. So they take him there and tie him to a tree. The mystery woman cuts the ropes and the fourth and fifth big men shoot and kill each other. Before he can get any answers, the mystery woman leaves. So the angel decides to hunt down the last big man, Dutch Hansen. In one panel, the angel hits him with a heavy chair and sends him hurtling into the fireplace, presumably burning to death.
Just like that? No fight or anything?
Then it turns out that the mystery woman is in cahoots with the green suit guy from the beginning, and then the angel makes direct eye contact with the reader while explaining their plot. The end.
So, that one was weird. I will say, these first two stories at least, are much more violent than I anticipated. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's not like any blood or anything, but it's still like way more brutal and kind of gruesome than I thought we would get away with in a story written in 1939.
Two divers investigate a sunken ship. The Submariner, in his first ever comic book appearance, stabs one of them to death and crushes the other's head with his bare hands.
In his defense, he thought they were robots.
He takes their bodies back to his home and takes off their helmets. Upon the discovery that these are in fact humans, his mother appears, claiming this is a great first step in their war of revenge. We learn that before Namor was born, his mother's home was destroyed by white humans. In response to this, she was sent as a spy to the surface, with a sacred mission to use her feminine wiles to enact vengeance on the surface world. It didn't go very well, so she just returned to the ocean where she would kind of hang out for 20 years. After hearing this, Namor is sent to the surface to destroy the world of men. Also, his cousin tags along.
Whew, finally. I was getting worried that all these heroes were going to be secret villains.
Namor and Dorma attack a lighthouse as their first act of war. The Submariner destroys the light and kills 3 men, although a couple of those are ambiguous. Then the pair jumps into an airplane, throws the pilot out, that's a 4th kill, and take off. Namor instructs Dorma to crash the plane somewhere and jumps back into the water. Story over.
We are now 3 for 3 Marvel superheroes who are actually relentless murderers.
Next is a Western tale called The Masked Raider by Al Anders. We follow Jim Gardley, a small-town rancher in Cactusville, California. The villainous Cal Brunder throws Jim in prison and steals his land. After a quick prison escape, Jim skips town, finds a wild horse, and covers his face in a black mask. From now on, he is the Masked Raider.
That's the name of the story!
Later, Brunder's bandits bullet Bleck and burn down his ranch, killing both Mr. and Mrs. Bleck in the process. I ran out of ways to alliterate halfway through that sentence. Just as Brunder's plan seems to be going off without a hitch, the Masked Raider arrives and starts picking off Brunder's men one by one. At least that's what he says he's going to do, but in reality he just goes straight for Brunder, apprehending him in the very next page. The story ends with this weird, vague hint towards a future story. I honestly don't know what to make of this, but hopefully all is revealed in the next issue.
Speaking of the next issue, can we get started on that? No! We've still got 3 stories. This book is 65 pages long.
Jungle Terror, a complete adventure story by Tom Dixon. That is the weirdest spelling of Tom I have ever seen. Whatever. This story starts with Ken Masters and Tim Roberts, whoever that is, discussing a professor who has gone missing in the Amazon jungle looking for a magical diamond belonging to an... oh no.
Yep, this is the racist one. With stories this old, I figured they would be at least a little bit offensive, but we got there quicker than I thought. I can't say I'm surprised, really, but, disappointed.
The story progresses about how you'd expect, with the bad guys following the protagonist to the jungle. They all get stranded and attacked by, and they keep using this word, the Savages. Ken and Tim meet up with the professor and tunnel out of the natives' village. They escape the island, but not before killing several of the indigenous people and stealing one of their diamonds.
The native population in this book is handled exactly how you might think, so we're just going to wrap this up and move right along to the next one because we've still got 2 stories left, and I am wasting precious minutes of my life talking about this one.
The next story is... Oh, ew, what's this? Where's the pictures? I don't want to read all that.
I did read Burning Rubber by Raymond Gill, but since it's just a short story with no pictures, we're actually going to just skip it for our purposes and move on to the next one.
Next is The Adventures of Khazar the Great. Wait, what's this? From the famous character created by Bob Bird.
So it turns out this story is actually just an adaptation of a story that was already written 3 years ago, 1936, called The King of Fang and Claw.
This is a story about a young rich kid named David Rand who, miraculously, is not afraid of animals.
Impossible!
His family crash lands in the tropical forests of the Congo, where David befriends the local jungle animals. His parents are much more concerned with getting off the island, as evidenced when the planes don't see their smoke signal, and John says poo. After his wife dies and a tree falls on him, John becomes convinced that the jungle is his home, much to the delight of his son David. The duo live in the jungle for years before they encounter a wealthy white man and an offensive caricature. The bad guy kills John, and David's lion friend kills the bad guy. David takes the name Khazar, and with that,
we are finally done with Marvel Comics #1. And don't go anywhere, we've still got plenty more to talk about. Now, despite the fact that these comics don't even exist in this time period and don't release for several months, I currently have in my possession every single issue until the end of 1940, thanks to whoever left those on my doorstep. Where these came from remains a mystery, but who am I to turn down free comics? Let's go ahead and get started with Marvel Mystery Comics #2.
After a quick recap, the Human Torch returns in a brand new adventure. Right away, it's confirmed that Professor Horton didn't survive when the Human Torch burned down his house in the previous issue.
I'll put him on the list.
The Human Torch, in his human form, watches the auto races when suddenly one of the cars flies off course in a fiery crash. The Human Torch leaps to the rescue, but it's too late. The driver is already dead. Immediately, the Torch decides this was no accident. This was murder. And the culprit? Quite clearly, the suspicious airplane that followed all the cars right before they exploded. The Human Torch explains this to the police, but is arrested on the spot because he is literally made of fire.
No, officer, this is all a misunderstanding.
While in his cell, the Torch learns the truth about the racing racket. He takes off, melting just about everything in his path. At the next race, Human Torch melts the killer plane, learns the location of the mobster responsible for all the racing deaths, and sets off in pursuit of justice. But oh no, they've trapped the Torch in a big bucket of water. Could this be the end for our hero?
No.
The Torch escapes and takes off for the next race in Austin City.
Austin? Get it? Like arson?
He arrives, but it's too late. He chases the gang to their hideout, where they hose him down, which we've established just tickles the Human Torch, and then traps him in molten steel. Then, once the steel hardens, they'll throw him in the ocean. But they never get that far, because immediately the Human Torch breaks free of their trap. He chases down the bad guy, pins him inside a burning car, and forces him to sign a confession for his crimes.
Not sure if that'll hold up in court, but it's technically not murder, so I'll take it.
Jane Freeman, lone passenger of the SS Oregon, has just arrived ashore in Hong Kong when she's attacked by a man only described as gruely. Luckily, the Angel is there in time to kill him.
If I'm counting right, that's 8 murders?
It turns out that Jane is after the hidden treasures of Alano, which I'm being told does not in fact have a basement. The Angel leaves her cryptic note and, oh look, that guy didn't die. In a nearby alley, the gruely guy talks to his associates about obtaining Jane's treasure map. Before they can give up any useful or interesting information, the Angel beats them all up. Meanwhile, at the International Hotel, Jane is pondering the nature of the treasures of the Alano when she is attacked by her best friend.
Not Mr. Sumner!
She pulls a gun, but it's no match for his gun! Sumner forces Jane to drive back to the secret base, which happens to be the exact place that the Angel assaulted all those guys. Things are starting to go south with our intrepid treasure hunter when the Angel appears and absolutely destroys this guy.
Moving on.
It's the return of the Submariner, once again by Bill Everett. This time, he goes to New York.
That's right, this time Namor takes Manhattan, just like the Muppets. I wonder what kind of crazy adventures he'll get up to there.
The Submariner immediately destroys the power plant, drowns multiple cops in Central Park, and steals a homeless man's clothes.
Oh.
Namor encounters a girl whose dress sets on fire. Having never in his life encountered flames, Namor leaps to the rescue, and it is established that the heat causes his whole body to, quote, act as a sprinkler. He then says, I want that girl, and steals her from the hospital, but not before threatening death to anyone who stands in his way. Namor throws a car at some police officers, so that's 5 more murders? Then Namor tries taking the girl underwater, but is thwarted by 2 ordinary police officers. He does kill one of them. The Submariner vanishes, and the story ends.
Oh. Okay, what's next?
The Masked Raider by Al Anders.
I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this one's just kind of boring. And don't get me wrong, I love westerns, but there is absolutely nothing interesting in this book. There is absolutely nothing to keep my attention. Oh, a skeleton! Okay, never mind, I won't.
In this exciting tale, our hero goes undercover in a gang of criminals which runs the region of Rawhide Range. See, it all comes back to this guy named Tebbs, and okay, yeah, it is super boring. Everything goes according to plan, and the Masked Raider brings down the Tebbs gang, and they all live happily ever after, whatever. Can we talk about American Ace now?
American Ace, written by Carl J. Loretta. It is great. Buckle up.
American Ace is actually a story about Queen Ursula, a banished monarch who has grown tired of a world without war. So, she conspires with the ruler of another country to set the world into a second world war. Right as the war breaks out, Perry Wade arrives in Atania's capital city, the center of the war. Within moments of his arrival, sirens go off and bombers appear overhead. An air raid! Before he can do anything to stop it, the bombs fall directly onto a pile of children, sending tiny mangled bodies hurled 40 feet in the air.
What?
Then the whole city gets blown up and set on fire. To this, Perry says, "Whew, my head," and the story ends.
Okay, there's no way to describe what just happened in a way that doesn't sound completely horrific, but you have to trust me. The whole book has this kind of darkly comedic undertone. It really makes it the best thing we've read so far.
To finish up this issue, let's check in with our old pal Kazar. In a new adventure written by Ben Thompson, Kazar fights an ape, and he races his lion brother Zar in the jungle, which suggests some kind of supernatural ability, as lions, get this, are very fast. After their race, the duo learns that the madness has come upon one of the elephants. After a quick elephant fight, they go back home. Kazar goes back, kills the ape they fought earlier, and the story comes to a close.
And that's a wrap on the year 1939. Every other comic book that we're going to be taking a look at today is from the year 1940. Don't look at the runtime. You're going to be alright. Let's move on to Marvel Mystery Comics number 3. And hey, some good news. This one's 3 pages shorter.
Starting this issue off, we have another classic Human Torch adventure from Carl Burgos, this time with a handy little illustration that introduces us to our main characters. Interestingly, the Human Torch still doesn't have a name, he's just called the Human Torch. Also, not to put this off too much longer, but what do you mean an agent of the planet Mars?
This'll be a good one, I can feel it.
Old Mr. Carson watches a science fiction movie and can't handle it, so the Human Torch agrees to help him out. Turns out the movie is real, and these guys are here to kidnap Mr. Carson. They won't rest until they have his formula for
TNT.
Human Torch comes to the rescue and learns that Carson has the recipe for Super TNT in his pocket, which is super inconvenient because those Martians apparently broke his spine.
Not my spine!
Carson then dies of Martian-related spine injuries, and the Torch swears that this Super TNT will never make it into the hands of evildoers. He gives the formula to Carson's daughter, who is then captured by evil Martians and tied to a train track. This guy wants to be the Emperor of America. Human Torch gets his head stuck in a jar, saves Diane from quite literally the most cliché death imaginable, and puts an end to this whole alien plot.
It's not as exciting as it sounds.
Some random woman gets kidnapped by a cult or something, and then the Angel has to save her. The Angel does his signature move, which is throwing a bad guy across the room, and easily escapes the dungeon.
That's it. That's the whole story.
The Submariner is back and ready to kill all humans.
You and me both, buddy.
In their continued efforts to detain the Submariner, the police have resorted to some less than traditional methods.
What are we doing here?
The plan works perfectly until she tries to shoot Namor point blank in the head. In response, he takes her out to the middle of the sea where he stumbles upon a war.
Oh, yeah, that'll happen.
Namor breaks into a Nazi submarine and uses its cannon to shoot down a plane. He then rigs the boat to explode and swims away.
I'm not counting this as murder because the only victims were Nazis.
Betty convinces Namor that Americans aren't all that bad and he should really help in the war effort. This is going to be a really fun period of comics to read. He explodes another enemy sub, and at the end of the story, he's faced with a decision between returning home to his people or helping the Allied soldiers in the war. Stay tuned for his exciting answer.
Can you believe it? The Masked Raider is back. What's he up to this time?
Nothing exciting, I can tell you that much. Another story about outlaw gangsters stealing ranch land from innocent farmers, when suddenly to the rescue comes the Masked Raider. How are these stories already so repetitive? You'd think 3 issues isn't enough to get tired of the same stories, but here we are. Anyway, here's American Ace.
American Ace!
Perry Wade offers to fly Jeannie to meet with her younger sister following the death of her parents during the events of the previous American Ace story. The comedic tone isn't as strong in this issue, but it is worth noting that Jeannie's grandfather looks like this. And of course, Queen Ursula is still iconic. Perry takes off to continue his work, which is never made completely clear, and within minutes his plane is shot down and crashes into Jeannie's roof. Don't worry, the doctor says he'll recover.
Gee, I can't wait for next week's issue to find out what happens to American Ace. In the meantime...
Next is another one with no pictures, you know the drill. And finally, the continued adventures of Kazar. You guys know I just love Kazar. The story begins with big game hunter and wild animal collector Steve Hardy. Remember that name, I'm sure it'll be important. The elephants, thankfully no longer stricken with the madness, alert Kazar to the presence of Steve and his crew of explorers.
And don't look now, but I think that's more racism.
Kazar and Traja, the previously mad elephant, scout out Steve's camp and at night free all the captured animals. There's more, even more explicit racism, and Kazar runs off. Steve's crew mutinies and Kazar gets attacked by a leopard. He's fine, he just walks it off basically.
And that's it for issue number 3. We kind of got through that one pretty quick. Let's see if we can't keep this pace going. Next up, we've got the first issue in a brand new series.
Daring Mystery Comics is basically just Marvel Mystery Comics, but with a different name. And it's not even that different! Just like the other book, Daring Mystery Comics #1 contains 9 stories, so I better stop talking if I ever want to finish this video. The first story is called The Fiery Mask, Chapter 1, A Complete Story, The Fantastic Thriller of the Walking Corpses, by Joe Simon.
You guys know I love a ridiculously long title.
The story wastes absolutely no time and immediately jumps into the action with no explanation. What's going on? What's that green light? That guy was harmless and dead and a murderer and alive? What does any of this mean? Jack Castle gets kidnapped by a huge green man that can bring corpses to life, defeats him with his advanced willpower and understanding of hypnosis, and gains mysterious superpowers in the process. It's later explained that he now possesses all the powers of the wind, the rain, the storm, even the sunlight. And so he puts on a costume and becomes the Fiery Mask.
Another thrilling origin story, except this time they dared to ask the question, what if this made no sense?
Next up is Soldier of Fortune John Steele by Dean Carr, spelled with one big capital A. This is another World War II story, something that is quickly becoming a trope among early 40s comics.
I can't imagine why.
We follow John Steele, something of a one-man army who can take out a whole squad of men with just his wit and weapons. In this particular adventure, he has to save a woman from the war. I don't know what she was doing before the story started. She just kind of appeared in combat, and it doesn't matter. John Steele to the rescue!
This is just an extended chase sequence where John Steele cracks wise and kills Nazis. In the end, he takes the girl to some general who happened to be nearby, and the story ends. If you think that's a little simplistic, you'd be right. There's 9 stories in this issue. They had to make some cuts somewhere.
Next up is The Texas Kid, Robin Hood of the Range by Ben Thompson. Oh boy, another Western comic. I can't wait. What's this one about? Oh, a group of raiders is trying to take over small ranch land, and now an honorable cowboy has to team up with the local sheriff and take down a gang of outlaws. How original. I've never read a story like this before. The Texas Kid, he doesn't have a name by the way, he's just the Texas Kid. Anyway, he tricks the bad guys into saying their plan out loud, and then the sheriff sentences them to hang. The end.
At least this next one looks pretty unique. We've got Monaco, Prince of Magic by Larry Antoinette.
Monaco is a hero magician who regularly saves Josie from dangerous situations. It turns out that the wicked Mr. Muro is actually after Josie's brother, and as it would happen, is Monaco's nemesis. Another car chase ensues, but this time in a cab. Monaco pays the driver $50, which is roughly equivalent to $1,000 in 2024's money, except it might actually be an illusion of money. It's not really made clear. He sends a vision of himself to Mr. Muro's lair, which they interpret as a ghost.
Would that make it ghost money?
Monaco is a man of seemingly endless ability. He's able to shrink himself down small enough to fit through a keyhole. He's able to magically teleport other people. We've already been over the whole ghost thing.
I don't have any definitive proof, but I think Monaco might be a god.
Monaco uses his magic, potentially godly powers to scare Mr. Muro so badly that he gets in his car, drives to the dock, gets in a seaplane, and flies away. Next is a fun little college football story called Flash Foster at Midwestern by Bob Wood. As a current college student, at least before I started this project, I'm sure I'll be able to relate to this 84-year-old comic book. We follow Flash Foster, star player for the Midwestern University football team. His fiancée Connie is kidnapped right before the big game. Those responsible then show up at Flash's house and say they'll kill Connie if Midwestern wins tomorrow.
But it's the big game!
He decides he's going to play his best anyway.
That's the spirit.
Even still, Flash gets benched partway through the game and decides to go chase down Connie's kidnappers. He races across town, beats up the bad guys, gets stopped by a cop for speeding, and still makes it back in time to finish the big game. In just 4 minutes of game time, Flash Foster single-handedly brings the team back from being 15 points behind. The story ends with Flash, now the town's hero, getting chosen to play in the Rose Bowl.
The big game! Football!
Next up is Phantom of the Underworld, The Case of Perone. Detective Doc Denton disguises himself as Dr. Stewart, which works out great because he's also an expert surgeon. Doc leads some evildoers to their deaths or detainment at the hands of destructive deputies as punishment for their dirty deeds. Doc remains in deep cover with Perone's gang. Doc drugs the dim-witted desperados and does away with them by way of detention.
Writing that section was more fun than reading the actual story.
The penultimate story of this issue is Wartime Wonders by Harry Francis Campbell. If you thought the last few stories were rushed, wait till you get a load of this one. Wartime Wonders is only 1 page long. It has no plot, no characters, and is pretty much just a collection of facts about machinery used in the war.
Real exciting stuff.
Finally, we have Barney Mullen, Sea Rover by Chaz Pearson. This one's interesting because it directly calls for audience participation.
See, this story explicitly challenges you to not let your eyes glaze over.
Yeah, it's another boring rush story with little to no interesting characters packaged in a collection of 6 other disappointing stories with art that's fairly average even for its time period.
But this time, they're on a boat.
The boat gets attacked by torpedoes, the crew starts a mutiny, and the Monopoly Man shows up.
And just when I thought I couldn't get more bored, they had to come and prove me wrong with a different, but even more uninteresting title. I don't want to be too hard on these books. I mean, the art form was in its infancy, no one really knew what they were doing yet. But man, does it get hard to read sometimes.
Daring Mystery Comics number 2 kicks off with a story called Zephyr Jones and His Rocket Ship by Joe Calcagno and Fred Schwartz. Right off the bat, the story uses much larger panels than previous issues have. This is great. It makes them so much easier to read, showcases the art more, and makes these 65 pages go by a whole lot faster. As for the story itself, it's exactly what it says in the title. Zephyr Jones, a young astronaut, finishes his father's rocket ship and launches an expedition to Mars. However, the plan goes south when all of the rocket's navigation equipment suddenly stops working. This is a devastating turn of events. It is at this point that Zephyr and his co-pilot, Corky Grogan, land on a nearby undiscovered planet.
Imagine living a full human life with the name Corky Grogan. Anyway.
The two land on this planet, which we learn is called Sunev, and encounter a race of English-speaking bird people. They get falsely accused of betraying the bird people's trust and then thrown in prison. At exactly that moment, the dreaded evil parrot people attack. Zephyr and Corky save the day with the use of their machine guns, a technological advancement that the bird people have yet to make. They prove their innocence, teach the bird people how to make guns, and fly off in search of another adventure.
This is now canonically the second race of aliens we've met in the Marvel Universe so far after those Martians from that Human Torch story. Definitely keep it in the back of your mind going forward. There are bird people living on the planet Sunev who could approach at any time. I'm sure it will come up again.
The second story in issue number 2 is The Phantom Bullet, Scourge of the Underworld by our old pal, Joe Simon. Murder!
Off to a good start.
There's been a murder, and only Alan Lewis, journalist extraordinaire, can get to the bottom of it. See, the clues just don't make any sense. A man strangled to death in his locked 20th story apartment. The only clues are a feather and handprints with 7 fingers.
Okay, now call me crazy, but I think I know of some bird people who are ready for vengeance.
In order to really get to the bottom of this case, Lewis puts on a bright yellow costume, complete with red cape. Now he can really start investigating. It turns out the culprits are bird people.
Called it.
But not those bird people, completely separate, unrelated bird people who also have 7 fingers.
Close enough, I'll take it.
That night, you didn't the phantom squeal to reappear as the cops at Benny's Your Place game?
No, that can't be right.
Turns out they weren't actually birdmen, but something a little more questionable.
Well, now that that's over with, we can finally get started with Trojak, the Tiger Man, King of the Jungle by Gregory Bikes. Now I know what you're thinking, how is this different from Kazar? This one has more racism.
Yeah, this one's pretty rough. This has all the tropes you would expect from a story about a white man who's magically the most powerful warrior in the jungle. He's taken in by an indigenous tribe as an infant, a topic which is handled in the least surprising way imaginable for a comic of this time period. The end of the story has the title character choosing to save white poachers from the very people they had previously attempted to enslave.
Not a good look. Let's skip to the next one.
Next is another classic no-picture story, but after that is K4 and his Sky Devils, which has no credited writer or penciler.
This one's about planes.
The story introduces us to 3 pilots who look virtually identical, so I'm sure that'll never get confusing. K4, one of the identical triplets, gets assigned to an undercover mission. He'll pose as a Nazi overseas in order to do some sort of reconnaissance for the Allied forces. After potentially the least sneaky infiltration of an enemy base in recorded history, K4 explodes a Nazi HQ and gets flown away in a British plane that happened to be nearby.
I mean, it's no American Ace, but yeah, it'll do.
Immediately following that, we have Mr. E by Joe Calcagno. 4 businessmen, all related to the Sneed Oil Company, mysteriously die one right after the other. Only one man can crack this mystery, and it's Victor J., also known as Mr. E. Mr. E goes to investigate the head of the Sneed Oil Company, Mr. Sneed himself. Following his investigation, Mr. E gets in a terrible car accident where his car falls off a cliff and into the river. Miraculously, he survives and decides that only one man could be responsible for this. His arch nemesis, the vampire.
Not the vampire!
The vampire abducts Mr. E and tells him all about his sinister plan to get ransom money from oil barons and then kill them anyway. They have a fight, the vampire tries to get Mr. Sneed to sign over the oil company, and we get to see this actually really charming panel. We end with a promise that Mr. E and the vampire will meet again in next month's issue, and I for one can't wait.
Finally, a story that actually has some real fun with the notion of heroes and villains. Once the rivalry between Mr. E and the vampire gets introduced, the story really takes off. Actually, I want to see more of them as it goes on.
Our last story of the issue is The Laughing Mask by Will Harr. We begin with a deadly locomotive crash. Assistant District Attorney Dennis Burton quickly discovers that this was no accident, but an intentional act of sabotage. So Dennis, in disguise as the Laughing Mask, decides to seek justice for the perpetrators. He uses a glowing floating mask to distract the criminals while he shoots them to death one by one.
Finally, another murderer. Things were getting a little too deathless for my taste.
Despite his apparent willingness to end the lives of those that oppose him, the Laughing Mask decides to spare the life of the final thug he encounters, who signs a written confession and turns himself in after the mask catches him trying to blow up a bridge.
And that's it for Daring Mystery Comics number 2. Interestingly, there were no returning characters in that one. Oh well, let's move on.
The Human Torch!
He's back, baby!
Torch gets a message about a new menace that's brought New York City into a state of decay. This threat is the Green Flame. Torch arrives in the city but has to come up with a fake name to get past the cops. This is where we get the first appearance of Human Torch's human name, Jim Hammond. It's spelled Hammond though, with one M, so take that for what it's worth. Suddenly, the Green Flame appears. Torch tackles the monster, which is somehow ice cold. Human Torch burns it to death in a flaming chokehold.
You were doing so good!
Despite the fact that several other Green Flame creatures pass by him, Torch decides now is a good time to check up on his old buddy Johnson, who he met during that whole racetrack fiasco. Anyway, here he learns about the criminal Dr. Maniac. Spelled with a Y, in case you were curious. It turns out that Dr. Maniac is actually the creator of these freezing green flames. Here, we get a glimpse at how these green flames are made.
Get ready.
Dr. Maniac puts some human men in asbestos suits and douses them in a bath of ice-cold green fire.
That's also how I came up with the idea for this video, but you don't see me bragging about it.
Human Torch does away with the green flame, saves a couple people, and puts Dr. Maniac in jail. Can't wait for another picture-action story. Next, the Angel is back, and this time, there's a really big guy.
Only the greatest villains for these the greatest of heroes.
Butch the Big Guy terrorizes the city at the behest of a fearsome mob boss. Who can stop him but the Angel? And then the Angel beats the snot out of him.
I'm not kidding. There's no story here. This is the bravest comic we've read by far because it was the first one to ask, what if the Angel fought a really big guy?
And now, another thrilling tale of Prince Namor, the Submariner. Finally, the answer we've all been waiting for. Will Namor return to his Antarctic underwater home, or will he abandon his people and all he holds dear to join the Allied forces in World War II?
Was there ever really a question?
Namor's decision is to gather an army of submariners to end this wretched war. Now, don't get it twisted. He does still enjoy killing humans. He's just doing it for a reason now.
Because someone told him to.
Namor, knowing that his army is completely useless outside of the water, decides to do this mission alone. He has to go save an innocent cargo crew that got mistaken for contraband.
I just can't get over the fact that all those years ago they wrote the most exciting, most perfect comic book ever written, and I'm the only one here talking about it.
Namor does whatever it was he was supposed to do, and then the day is saved and he has to escort a boat to Scotland. Also, there's a big explosion. Yay! Now it's time for my absolute favorite, the Masked Raider.
That was sarcasm.
A prospector strikes gold. Literally! Naturally, he tells everyone and immediately starts gambling. He's trailed down and robbed by two men, but have no fear. The Masked Raider is here to save the day.
What do you think he was doing right before this? Like, do you think he was just waiting for the story to start, or what?
Before the Raider and the Prospector can get back to the dig, the Prospector's partner is attacked by those same men. Of course, they're no match for the Masked Raider, who ends the conflict with a single punch. Next month, the mystery of the poison arrows? I wonder what that could be about. I have no clue what that story will be about.
And now for something I wasn't expecting. Electro, the marvel of the age by... Well, it just says Doll, but that's really the pen name for Steve Doll. And let's just get this out of the way right now. Not that Electro, that Electro.
Ingenious inventor Philo Zog, yes, that's actually his name, invents a very strange machine that he calls Electro. This scarlet robot can do amazing things like walking or punching. Zog hires some husky, intelligent young men to aid himself and Electro in the fight against evil. One of these guys stops a kidnapping, but gets trapped in the cellar. So the robot comes and saves him by beating up the kidnappers with his signature robot punch.
One interesting thing about Electro is that it appears he has to be remotely controlled by Zog or one of the other operatives. And don't get me wrong, he doesn't pilot the machine Electro. The machine Electro goes out into the field and Zog feeds it little commands with his little red microphone.
Electro saves the guy and the kidnapped kid just in time for another startling adventure. Ferret Mystery Detective by Stockbridge Winslow.
Now that is a name and a half.
Author/private investigator Ferret is sitting in his New York home when a gunshot man stumbles in through his front door and falls down dead. A bunch of stuff happens that I don't really care about. I think his house burns down at one point, I don't know. Eventually it turns out the killer is this guy, who appeared in exactly one panel earlier in the story.
Next.
Another Khazar story. This time, Khazar confronts the man who kills his father. Khazar assembles the Jungle Avengers.
Wait. I don't think we can make that reference yet.
He assembles a team of mighty jungle animals to take down Fatface, who has a real name, but that one's better. It turns out that the animals actually don't want to kill that guy, so Khazar will have to go it alone. The issue ends before Khazar confronts the man who killed his father.
Okay. This video is getting way out of hand. We've been here for far too long, which means we're going to start the lightning round. Now what that means is that unless something genuinely very interesting happens, I'm going to be limiting each story's synopsis to 50 words or less. Hopefully this gets us through the project a whole lot faster. Now let's take a look at the first issue in our lightning round, Marvel Mystery Comics number 5.
Human Torch gets a distress signal for a medicine delivery to an island on Lake Superior, but it's all a trick by prison escapees. He steals a plane, crashes it, gets chased by skiers, crashes into a frozen cave, and drowns the criminals. Also, his fire skywriting powers return.
Next story, lightning round.
The Angel is shorts now. He turns over a bunch of cars and beats up a bunch of thugs. Still not 100% on why he flipped all those cars over. Maybe it was so they couldn't get away? I don't know. Namor has done a complete 180 on humans, now deciding to fully leave his ocean home to help end the war. When he returns to America, he gets hit by a plane and gets arrested. Stops the gang from doing something, and the story ends. Someone is shooting people with poison arrows. The Masked Raider gets to the bottom of it. It turns out to all be a plot to keep the sheriff from being reelected. The Raider finds the gang responsible with very little effort and takes them down.
They go to jail.
2 Electro operatives go to war-torn Bolivia. When things are looking bad, they take control of the robot, which can somehow fly all the way to, I'm assuming, Europe in no time at all. The bad guy shoots himself in the head. Ferret has a pet ferret now.
I think that's all I need to say.
Kazar, after quite the struggle, finally confronts Fatface, the man who killed his father. He does get kidnapped and sliced a few times, but other than that, it's a pretty successful murder. Now that that's resolved, maybe we don't have to see any more Kazar stories? I can wait.
That's it for that issue, and I gotta say, this lightning round is working great. Let's keep it going with Daring Mystery Comics number 3.
Dale of the FBI!
Dale!
Dale is the best agent the FBI's got, so when the Red Corker gang kidnaps a child, he's the only man for the job. The best part of this one is unquestionably the bit where Dale climbs out onto the wing of the plane he was flying, swoops the kidnapped child off the ground, shoots Red Corker to death, gets back in the cockpit, and flies away.
I assume Dale will be making his live-action debut any day now.
Breeze Barton in the Miracle City takes place in the near future of 1945.
Ooh.
American pilot Breeze Barton is wandering through the desert when he ends up in the Miracle City, an alternate dimension where no one ages. Using the powers of magnetism, he defeats the evil demon people and escapes back to his home dimension. The Purple Mask by Will Harr. Before we get started, what's going on with that guy's face?
Since none of this really matters anyway, that's canon and he just looks like that.
This is actually a sequel to The Laughing Mask, but Dennis Burton just decided it was time to rebrand, I guess. The final battle here takes place surrounded by an acid moat, which ends up melting one of the bad guys alive. Also, the mask does just shoot people.
Yeah, they're all murderers, what are you gonna do?
The Phantom Reporter has to figure out a string of assaults/murders happening throughout the city. In the end, he uncovers a conspiracy leading all the way back to the chief of police. He solves the problem like any good reporter would, with his fists. Trojack's back.
Of all the characters to come back from the last issue, we get Trojack? Why does Marvel care so much about these dumb jungle characters?
Trojack has to fight a big monster and then save a girl from some Nazis.
I used up most of my word count complaining on that one, and I don't even care.
Marvex, the super robot, was created in the 5th dimension, so jot that down. His creators intend to enslave Marvex, so he swiftly murders them. Marvex escapes into the main dimension, whatever number that is, and fights crime by throwing a man through a brick wall and down 13 stories. Next is Captain Strong of the Foreign Legion, and I'm sure this one won't be offensive.
Okay, this one admittedly is not as bad as some of the others, but it's not great.
Let's just move on before I get into some kind of trouble. The last story in this issue is the weird one-page cartoony thing that's a bit out of place. I have nothing to say about this one.
Moving right along, we have Marvel Mystery Comics number 6.
The Human Torch successfully stops the invention of the nuclear bomb by burning 2 men to death. Also, it's revealed now that not only can he cover himself in fire, but he's also the master of all flames and can command fire with his voice. Okay, well, whatever. The Angel's back to pants. I think the shorts were just a coloring error. He saves the day by going back to his signature move in this one of mashing his enemies to a pulp.
I haven't been keeping track, but this feels about right.
Namor is back, and what? Namor is being held accountable and is the first Marvel hero to stand trial for murder. He gets sentenced to death.
The electric chair!
But the chair doesn't kill him, no. It actually revitalizes him. Namor once again pledges to kill all humans, even going so far as to call them all stupid idiots.
How dare he!
Another Masked Raider story, this time with the same old boring characters and tired plot points. Some bad guys are smuggling cows to Mexico by boat, and that was the most interesting part of the story. The Electro crew is back, this time with racism. A giant robot sets out to end the drug trade, and Philo Zog gets a personal letter from the President of the United States for his efforts. Ferret, this time with no pet ferret, has another largely unremarkable adventure with some honestly pretty bizarre detective work. He just immediately figures it out, gets one piece of evidence that doesn't really connect to the case, and then the story ends. Finishing things off with another Kazar. Honestly, how are there still more people coming to this jungle? Everyone who ever comes to Kazar's jungle dies, and no one makes it out. Anyway, some guy comes in and makes Kazar mad, so he runs him over with an elephant. The end.
Let's keep this lightning round going. Daring Mystery Comics number 4 is next.
The Purple Mask uses a series of disguises to go after a gang of criminals responsible for a bank robbery. He corners them in their hotel room, but they jump out of the window. Mask jumps after them onto his motorcycle, chases them down, and throws them into the road. The return of K4 and his Sky Devils, the trio land in a secret Nazi hangar and uncover a Zeppelin that will fill the Seine with bombs. The crew takes off. K4 jumps out of his plane and blows up the blimp from the inside, ending the threat for good. Monica the Magician saves Josie from trouble once again. They chase down mean Mr. Miro, who just showed up, and have an aerial dogfight that ends in the desert. Monica rides a vulture to safety. Then he turns giant and takes down Miro's plane. Whirlwind Carter of the Interplanetary Secret Services.
What exactly am I looking at?
Whirlwind Carter, citizen of Venus, teams up with astronaut Brenda Hill to reclaim Earth after the Martians take over New York City. Note that the Martians in this story appear to be unrelated to the Martians that Human Torch encountered. They cover the city in toxic gas that drives out all the Martians, and Whirlwind is appointed head of Earth's Interplanetary Secret Service. Marvex is back, this time saving a wrongfully convicted man on death row by bringing in the real culprit. He stops a prison riot, not before surviving the electric chair, of course, and brings the killers to justice, saving the innocent man in the process. G-Man Don Gorman.
That one can't be real.
Oh, it's real. Don Gorman invented the revolutionary supercharged engine, which he intends to give to the United States government. He gets kidnapped after a bunch of his planes go missing. Don breaks out and cracks the case. The Nazis did it. Breeze Barton in the world of... come on, guys.
Now this one is exactly as bad as you think it is, so we're just gonna go ahead and skip right to the next one. See, you can't have two offensive ones back to back. Oh, come on.
Yet another terrible tale of Trojak, probably my least favorite character in any of these books so far. At least most of the story is about Trojak killing Nazis. After a certain point, there's really not anything that bad, so consider me relieved.
That's everything for that issue.
Moving right along in our lightning round, we have Marvel Mystery Comics number 7. The Human Torch has a sudden desire to become a police officer. So, in between panels, he attends and graduates from police school. As an official officer of the law, he defeats a corrupt politician with his flame powers and... what's this? The Submariner. Oh, now things are getting interesting. We'll have to wait until the next issue to figure that one out.
Our first crossover. I can't wait.
The Angel has to figure out why someone was trying to kill poor Betty, so he ties his suspect to the front of his car and drives recklessly. The criminal spills that Betty's aunt is going to poison Betty's father at exactly 6 o'clock. Angel stops the crime and Betty's aunt dies, a victim of police violence. Namor makes good on his promise of revenge by destroying New York City. The Submariner goes on a rampage, punching the mayor in the face, destroying the Empire State Building, and, of course, crashing a boat full of people. We end by teasing a fight against the Human Torch.
Crossover event of the century.
Masked Raider is back!
Yay!
The Raider has to protect some rancher from a gang of cowboys that want to steal his land. No, but it's different this time.
Oh?
This time, the Marshal was the gang leader the whole time.
Oh.
Electro defeats the lackeys of the evil gangster Sarpo. No, not Sardo. Sarpo. It's very different. Then he kills 2 elephants.
He didn't have to do that, I think.
Ferret returns, and so does his pet ferret. Celebrate accordingly. The man gets kidnapped and held for ransom in an abandoned mansion. With the help of his pet and some brilliant detective work, Ferret deduces the true criminal and arrests those responsible. The woman was a man all along!
Not unpacking that one any further. Let's keep moving. Finish off the issue with a lightning round.
Gazar sees a plane for the first time. In the plane is the wicked Red Skeleton. Also in the plane is a professor and his daughter. Skeleton kills the professor, which prompts Kazar to blow up the villain's plane and stab him in the throat. The professor's daughter rides an elephant to safety.
And I think that's going to do it for this lightning round. I'll be honest, when I decided I was going to cover every issue written in the year 1940, I don't think I realized that I had bitten off more than I could chew in this short period of time. So, to make things easier for myself, I'm going to cut the video off here. Yes, I'm going to be reading the final 11 issues of 1940 in the next video, but we've still got one more to go. Will it be good? Will I regret ending this video on this specific issue instead of something as exciting as the promise of the first ever crossover in Marvel history? I don't know.
Mystic Comics number 3 is the first and last issue in the series that is available to me, so I'm probably missing some pretty crucial context. Shouldn't matter though, because these early comic stories only reference previous issues on incredibly rare occasions. Our first story is called The Blue Blaze, no author is credited. Some bad guys summon an alien monster to take down the Blue Blaze. During their first battle, the Blaze says oof. During their second battle, the Blaze encases the monster in molten lead.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Hercules is, from the very first page, remarkably similar to Trojak, which is itself remarkably similar to Kazar. In case you were wondering, this guy has seemingly no connection to the Greco-Roman mythological figure Hercules, apart from his incredible size. Here he casually kills a bull that was on the loose somehow. The dam breaks for no apparent reason, which of course Hercules takes care of with very little effort. Then the story ends. Flexo the Rubber Man!
I like the look of this guy.
The fact that Flexo is made of rubber has absolutely no bearing on this story. For all intents and purposes, he's the same as Electro, a mindless robot controlled by an operator, or in this case, 2 operators. He beats up the bad guys, that's all there is to it.
It is getting way too hot for this suit. I'm not wearing this.
Space Rangers, with our lead characters Bob, Raleigh, and Nibs. This story takes place in the year 2300 AD, still New York though, of course. Their stellar mission takes them to the planet Glacor, which along with Earth, Mars, and Sunev is one of only 4 planets known to support intelligent life. The pilots get captured by Glacorians and narrowly evade a fiery death by dragon. They beat up the bad guys and then blow up the entire world.
Make that 3 planets.
The Mind Master Excello.
I love Excel.
Excello stops some evildoers from blowing up a train track. Later, he jumps out of a moving plane into a moving car and fights the bad guy. Like any reasonable Russian operative who just witnessed an otherwise normal man jump out of a moving plane into a moving car with the sole purpose of beating him up, the bad guy decides to end it all right there. The plane that Excello jumped out of then crashes into the spy headquarters. Also, he at some point re-entered the plane, don't ask how. The cops hear commotion and put a stop to things.
I think we need someone to keep an eye on Excello. I'm worried about his health.
Dakor, the detective magician.
What, did they draw that out of a hat?
This is another story where indigenous people kidnap our white protagonist because they believe him to be their god.
I love to read this.
Dakor does blackface to save the girl.
Okay.
He saves the day with magic, let's move on. Zara of the Jungle?
Oh, this again?
As if we didn't have enough jungle-themed characters.
Can we lay off the jungle, please? For like a minute?
The normal boring man takes on some slave traders wearing skull masks and loses. Zara frees the slaves by hanging a man. The dynamic man, there's that hat again. Our hero, who despite not wearing any kind of facial disguise maintains a secret identity, has to get to the bottom of a mysterious killer called the Hood. The Hood is targeting some banker, and in the end it turns out he's the head of the bank. And finally, the last story of this issue and the last story of this video, the Invisible Man, known as Dr. Gade. That's the full title, I don't know. When the bad guys throw the doctor in a river, he fakes his own death by having a newspaper report on it and allowing himself to be buried alive. When the criminals dig up his casket to learn the secret of his invisibility, which of course they were going to do, he springs out and beats them all up. What was the point of this? Just punch them.
Well, that's it for Mystic Comics #1, and I gotta say, I'm not impressed.
Well, that's going to do it for our first episode of the Marvel Project. What did we learn? Well, we learned that murder is okay for superheroes. In fact, they do it often. We learned that the jungle is a perfect place for a boring at best, upsetting at worst comic book action storyline. And we learned that Marvel Comics weren't always good. Tune in next time for an exciting look at the remaining 11 comics from the year 1940. I'm sure they'll be better than this. Well, if you need me, I'll be right here. I've been Isaac Autry, and I've got all the time in the world. Good night. Should probably put this coat on the right way, actually. That's gonna look bad for the video.